Namaste, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here at the Discourse of Kala Evam Adhyatm. Today we have with us Pankaj Saxena ji, and I have Pankaj ji. It's really my pleasure that you have joined today, and amazing to see here.
Same.
Thank you for coming. Today's topic is art in light of, harmonizing inner and outer realms, art in the light of Sanatan Dharma. But before we invite Pankaji, let me give a little, introduction. Though he is very well-known author, and his work on Hindu temple is very well-known. So Pankaj is a prolific author, delves into realm of Hindu temples, Indian art, literature, history, and culture through his insightful writings. Beyond these realms, his curiosity extends to cultural anthropology, evolutionary biology, and ecology. Having embarked on over 600 temple trails, he passionately explores ancient Hindu temples. His literary contribution graced platforms like India Facts, Indic Today, Pragyata, Swarajya, Silk News, Vijayvani, among others. With 3 authored books under his belt, Pankaj currently serves as an associate professor at Rastam School of Public Leadership in Sonipat. His leadership extends to being the director of Center of Cultural Leadership, reflecting his dedication to fostering cultural understanding and growth. And one more thing, which personal note I can say, Pankaj is on our Indic Study Board also. So welcome, Pankaj. Over to you.
Namaste, Kiranji, and thank you very much for giving me the platform here. Just a little correction in the bio. I used to work at Rashram for a very brief period in 2021. So for more than a year now, I am the co-founder of Brahat Culture Creative, which Raghav Krishna ji is the founder, and that's how we have come in association with Auro University also in a very independent capacity, and that's why we are here. So with that, I would like to start. I will share my presentation if that's okay. I'll share my screen.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Is it visible?
Hmm.
And am I also audible and visible?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. So let us start. The topic takes us to the harmony of the inner journey and the outer journey in the vehicle that we are going to use today. The vehicle through which we are trying to understand this is art. So first, we will have a little discussion on what is Indian art. And because we are here at Auro University, everything begins with, even otherwise, with the great thought of Sri Aurobindo. So let us begin from him. Sri Aurobindo says, and he makes a comparison first. We'll go into this comparison of Western art and Indian art. And then one very perceptive line that he says about Indian art, what is Indian art at its core? After that, we'll delve into its principles. And he observes this very sharp thing about Indian art, which many other greats have discovered independently, like Ananda Kumar Swami. The Western mind, he says, is arrested and attracted by the form, lingers on it, and cannot get away from its charm, loves it for its own beauty, rests on the emotional, intellectual, and aesthetic suggestions that arise directly from its most visible language, confines the soul in the body. It might almost be said that for this mind, form creates the spirit. The spirit depends for its existence and for everything it has to say on the form. We'll take a look at one very good specimen of Western art, neoclassical art, when Renaissance hit Europe. This is one of the most famous creations of Renaissance. David by Michelangelo. And you can see the realism of this piece. Everything is sculpted so beautifully. So there, first of all, it is beautiful. There is absolutely no doubt about it. When we talk about Western art, when we talk about the heights of Western art, not what is going on today in the name of art, but the height of classical art, it is undoubtedly one of the best creations aesthetically from the point of view of beauty that we can talk of. But this is also the case. Let's go back to those lines of Sri Aurobindo again. There is too much of a stress on the body. And I'm not just saying the human body. Ancient Greek architecture, sculpture, painting also focused on that. And it is famous that how the Greeks focused on particularly the male body, but on the realism of sculpture. But that is not it. If you see their buildings, if you see their architecture, if you see their sculpture, there is too much of a focus on imitating nature, which is what Sri Aurobindo here is saying is a peculiar feature of Western art. This is, uh, he goes even 2000 years back into the pagan Greek art also, and he remarks about that too. That is, there is a too much of a focus on the bodily aspect of it, the physical aspect of it. It is extremely beautiful, but there is something which doesn't let it rise above the copying of nature. And Kumar Swami says that for an Indian artist, that is not so. Indian artist has to rise above nature, which does not mean that to become unnatural in expression, which means that what the constraints of nature you have to overcome aesthetically, spiritually, to suggest a greater truth, to suggest absolute truth. We will take a look at other art forms. For example, if you take Taj Mahal, and I will include Islamic architecture in Western art, which is because Islamic architecture is not Eastern art, although it is in Eastern Hemisphere, or even what they call as South Asia, Asia, even East, some places in East Asia. But basically, what is Islamic architecture? It is an amalgamation of the art forms that it encountered when Arabic Islamic armies went out of Arabia and encountered on one hand Byzantium and on the other hand Persia. So it is a mixture of that, but it has a deep imprint of, in architecture, it has a deep imprint of Byzantine architecture, which was deeply inspired by the Western art forms. And Persia also in that sense was inspired in some degrees by that. So I will include Islamic architecture in that, and I will give a few examples of that. For example, if you go to Taj Mahal, if you go to Humayun's tomb, if you go to the Bibi Ka Maqbara in Aurangabad, all of these monuments, and to gesture towards the Victorian architecture, if you go to Victoria Memorial in Kolkata, you will see that there are ready-made grid lines. Once you enter the gate of Taj Mahal, you will see that there are ready-made perspective lines, and they are all leading towards the monument. For example, there are these beautiful manicured lawns and gardens. Any photographer, and even an amateur photographer, would know that he takes his cameras and he's looking at the world through the viewfinder, and he points the camera towards, once he enters Taj Mahal, and towards the actual monument, and he sees that there are ready-made perspective lines leading to the monument. If anyone who has dabbled in photography or painting, perspective lines are those lines which actually lead towards the center of the art piece, which is somewhere on the 2/3 of uh, uh, the frame, and which has maximum attraction. It creates more attraction. So when you go to any Islamic monument, you will see those wonderful grid lines. It is extremely aesthetic, extremely appealing to the camera, picture perfect. But when you go deeper and nearer, you find that that language stops speaking beyond a point. It's not like that architecture doesn't speak at all. It does. But beyond a point, it does not speak. It is magnificent in its monumentality, in its first impression. But upon very close inspection, actually that sheen diminishes. But on the other hand, go to, for example, Brihadeshwar Temple, Tanjore in Tamil Nadu. it has monumentality. So the first thing which will strike you there too, also the monumentality of architecture. You enter the gate and it's huge. It's one of the, it's still the highest Hindu temple in service, which is still working. So first of all, the monumentality of architecture. How did they do it? It's so big, it's so huge. How did they manage so without any cement and without any modern techniques? So that's what hits you first, the monumentality of architecture. But when you see it up close, even a small uh, place, even a small piece of stone, will have exquisite sculpture telling a story from the Puranas, from the Itihasas, and from various Shastras of Sanatan Dharma, which will be conveying some of the greatest truths of Hindu Darshana. And the greatest and the most absolute truth in many ways is also conveyed, the absolute truth about finding self-realization, about discovering the ultimate reality. For example, in any great Shiva temple, in Chola temple or in other temples, there will be a form of Tripurantak Shiva. Tripurantak Shiva is the form where he's shooting, it is a great Puranic story, where Shiva has to kill 3 demons who live in 3 realms, and who can be destroyed only when the 3 realms come in one line, and he has to shoot an arrow which destroys all 3 at the same time. Now it's a wonderful story, and that is our main USP, you can say. We have been telling wonderful stories all the time, but beyond that story, there is a great truth to it. They are indicating 3 states of consciousness: Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti. So we all know that there are these 3 states of consciousness, and we all are privy to it. While we are awake, while we are asleep, and while we are in deep sleep. Sushupti is while we are in deep sleep, where we forget who we are. For example, sometimes you are so tired and you fall into such sleep that you lose all sense of time. You don't even know how many hours have passed. Those who are lucky, actually, daily sleep is like that. Lots of hours just pass without any difficulty, without even you realizing. During that time, you forget that you are this identity. You are Pankaj, you are someone else. Which means that this is not truth, because truth cannot disappear and then appear again. Truth has to be permanent. That is where our Shastras start and say, search for something that is permanent, that never disappears. If Pankaj disappears for a certain period of time, that means that Pankaj is not the ultimate reality or the true reality. You have to go beyond this identity. So all 3 states have to be passed. When you pass that state, you reach a state which is beyond these 3 states, which is the Turiya, which is described in our Shastras as greater than this, which is nearer, almost akin to self-realization. So when Lord Shiva, shoots that arrow and destroys those 3 realms, that story is actually indicating the greatest of Hindu Darshana. That is the beauty of Hindu architecture. And not just that, I will not go, because this lecture is not just about architecture. We will discuss a little of it. Every single point in our architecture, every single dimension of architecture takes you to explain Hindu Darshana in its deepest and most abstract of principles. That is the singular achievement of Hindu architecture, that they took something so concrete and yet they took you to something so abstract, which is philosophy, which is Hindu Darshana. They changed the medium, which was very, very concrete, and they made it extremely subtle. That's where Indian art is different than Western art. And here, Sri Aurobindo actually makes a very perceptive comment about Indian art. Why is this so? And basically, it is on these lines that we will understand what Indian art is in this lecture. The Indian attitude to the matter is at the opposite pole to this view. So Western art seems like, their science also says, consciousness has evolved from matter. What do we say? What does a system like Kashmir Shaivism or even Sankhya say? That all of matter has descended from consciousness. There is a supreme consciousness, and everything, all animate and inanimate objects, descend from it. So the point of departure itself are completely opposite. They are not just different, they are completely opposite. They say that primary matter is primary and consciousness evolves from it. We say that consciousness is primary, matter evolves from it. And this is the differentiation between the two civilizations. That changes our attitude towards art too, which is what Sri Aurobindo is saying. The Indian attitude to the matter is at the opposite pole to this view. The Indian mind form does not exist except as a creation of the spirit and draws all its meaning and value from the spirit. So the consciousness perceives. This characteristic attitude of the Indian reflective and creative mind necessitates, in our view of its creations, an effort to get beyond at once to the inner spirit of the reality it expresses and see from it and not from outside. So, our attempt is to attract all the attention towards what is that which witnesses all of this. It doesn't stop at the witnessed, it takes our attention towards the witnesser. Who is that? Who is that which witnesses everything? And that is the purpose of Indian art. Nobody could say it more beautifully than that. So this is where Indian art is different. They say that actually a lot of Western commentators used to disparage a lot. They still do. If you read one of their books, some of their books, they will say, "Oh, Indian art is symbolic." They had these stories, mythical stories, which are mythical stories by that which they mean that they are just flights of imagination of superstitious primitive people who were afraid of nature, who didn't have science, art, and good economy, and so they were afraid of nature and its forces. So they created all of these superstitious stories. On that, they created art, painting, sculpture. So these absurd, vigrahas, absurd sculpture where they have 16 hands or 12 hands or 10 or 8 hands. How can they have 12 hands? How can they be in a posture which is impossible? How can Nataraj be in that posture in which one leg is there, one leg is here? That is so absurd. So they still disparage. Now they don't do it so openly, but if you read the books of Western art, they will consider realistic art at a higher level, much higher level, and they will consider Indian art to be much lower, which is symbolic. But actually, once you understand the language and meaning of Indian art, you will know that to stop at realism is to only achieve the lower goals. To raise yourself to the level of cosmology, to the level of symbolic art, is a greater form of art, and that is the essence of Indian art. Now, one more quip of Sri Aurobindo on Indian art. When it comes to Indian art, here the only right way is to get at once through a total intuitive or revelatory impression or by some meditative dwelling on the whole, dhyana, in the technical Indian term, to the spiritual meaning and atmosphere, make ourselves one with that as completely as possible, and then only the helpful meaning and value of all the rest come out with a complete and revealing force. So first you have to align yourself, make yourself sahridaya by doing sadhana and meditation, and only then the art comes out for the artist and also for the aesthete. If you want to create art, you have to do meditation. If you want to understand and partake the greatest and deepest meaning of art, you have to indulge in meditation. And that is how it is all achieved. Let's go to one similar quotation of Kala Evam Adhyatm, one of the greatest art critics and artists, scholars of art, who have lived in contemporary times. She basically created IGNCA in New Delhi, and it has created so many volumes of on Indian art, architecture, and sculpture. Her contribution to codifying knowledge about Indian arts in English language and language metaphors and idioms which are contemporary and more accessible to us is just amazing. So she says, for the traditional Indian artist, artistic creation was the supreme means of realizing the universal being and nothing less. Art was a discipline, sadhana, a yoga, and a sacrifice, a yajna. It was nothing less than that. In its greatest form, for us, art is that. And that's our point of departure. That's how we start. So, three principles of what is Hindu art, what is Indian art. So, first of all, this principle is inviolable. That which is beautiful, it has to be beautiful. It has to appeal to the eye. Now, what is beautiful? They'll say that it's a plebeian understanding that art cannot be judged by everyone. Of course, art cannot be judged like science can be judged, but there are some markers in our brain in which a majority will feel, experience a sense of beauty when they see something beautiful. On the right hand, the beautiful Indian painting of Radha and Krishna. It is certainly, even if you do not understand the symbolism, iconography of this, the provenance of this painting, the school which created this painting, if you know none of that, you will at least know what this painting is about. On the other hand, this the painting on the left, and it's an extremely famous painting, which sold for millions of dollars, still will if it's again in market. If you do not know the history and provenance of this painting, you will actually not understand what it is about. And even after understanding its history, its provenance, its chronology, it's not sure that you will find it beautiful. So first of all, we need to stress the first principle of Indian art, that which is beautiful. Then that which is meaningful. The second great feature of Indian art is it has to be extremely meaningful. On the left, again, there is an art installation. And in contemporary times, actually, they have abandoned these terms like painting, sculpture, architecture. They say installation, which is at the same time also architecture, sculpture, painting, or they don't know. It's just out in the open. It's there. So they call it installation. So on the left, there is this installation, art installation. And on the right, this is the beautiful and exquisite Mahishasur Mardini in Rani Ki Vav, Gujarat, Patan, where she is killing the Mahishasur demon. You can see there is Mahish in the Mahish form, and then the demon which emerges from it, and at that moment she strikes. In all her hands, there are various ayudhas. Ayudhas are the weapons. She strikes a pose which means something. She has eyes which mean something. She has proportion in her body which is carefully thought about. All the weapons in her hand are extremely important and given to her to convey a particular form. So this, everything is meaningful in this uh, sculpture on the right. It's not just an installation. On the other hand, if you ask for meaning to a modern artist, he will say that that's a very plebeian understanding of art. If you look for any definite meaning, if you look for any absolute truth, you have not understood art. For example, in 2005, I guess, Harold Pinter won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And when the Nobel Committee asked him, what is your work about? And he says, he just very flippantly says, my work is about the cat under the table, which means that how dare you ask what my work is about? I cannot describe it because it's great art. If you are able to describe it, they think it's not great art. So that is the kind of attitude. Now imagine a scientist taking that attitude in a Nobel committee when they are asking about what your new research is about. And it's impossible that a scientist gives that kind of answer. He will be laughed out. But art, due to certain things, which is a different topic, due to certain trends in the West, due to the absence of dharma, basically, it has degraded to a point where it has become meaningless. So the second most important feature of art for Indian art is, first was that which is beautiful, second is that which is meaningful, and third is that which elevates our consciousness. On the right hand side, first of all, let's discuss what's on the left hand side. On the left hand side is one of the most famous quote unquote art installations in the West, Marshall Duchamp's, I guess, inverted toilet. So he just inverted a toilet seat. It is, I guess, by date, till date, the costliest art piece that has ever sold. It's millions and millions. I forgot what is the true price, but it's millions and millions of dollars. It's a toilet seat, which is inverted toilet seat. Nobody ever asked what it means. There are various theories which people keep writing tomes and PhDs on what this means, but the artist never actually gave a satisfying answer because there is no meaning. It's just whatever he felt like. He inverted a toilet seat, took a picture, and installed it somewhere, and that actually became a super duper hit. So on the right, there is this Chol sculpture of Shiva Dakshinamurti, where Shiv is the Guru. This form is the Guru form, where he is teaching, where he is giving Gyan, the ultimate supreme knowledge to his disciples. So the third and the most important part of Indian Hindu art is that which elevates our consciousness. art has to elevate our consciousness. One feature of art is that it makes you sahridaya. So it takes you to the chitta-bhumi of the artist. But if the chitta-bhumi of that artist is vikshipta, to look at it from the yogic chitta-bhumi point of view, if that chitta-bhumi is vikshipta or kshipta, it will take you downwards. But an Indian art has to elevate you. That is why the artist has to engage, just like Sri Aurobindo said, in hours and hours of meditation, so that his state of consciousness is much higher. And whatever he creates from that state of consciousness is something closer to the divine, closer to the ultimate reality. And when you partake that piece of art, you actually share the state of mind of that artist, which is on an elevated level. And that is how you elevate your own consciousness. So art in these three forms: that which is meaningful, that which is beautiful, that which elevates our consciousness. That's the point of departure. That's what Kala Evam Adhyatm is saying. That's what Sri Aurobindo is saying. I will not go deeper into Ras because that's a complete theory. You can spend years in this, but it's a basic concept. I will tell an anecdote instead and move on. Ras is the emotional essence of an artwork to be enjoyed by a sahridaya. In this, Natyashas expands upon rasa, on the different kinds of rasa, and this is a shared vocabulary which you can find in painting, in iconography, in painting, in sculpture, in architecture, in darshana, actually in many disciplines. Art, iconography, music, dance, drama, you can find this. Natyashastra is a text which, as the name says, is about Natya. But if you want to study, understand sculpture deeply, you have to go to Natyashastra because it explains the mudras, the hasta and the mudras. Because that is how you recognize the state of mind of the deity that is represented. That is what is sculpted on the wall of a temple. So if you want to go to a temple, if you want to understand it perfectly, you have to go to the Natyashastra along with many other texts. I'm saying in a sense. So all of these disciplines are connected to each other because there is a shared sacred vocabulary of darshana, which through the language of Sanskrit, the great Dev Bhasha of Sanskrit, which keeps traveling in all of these disciplines, binds them into one, makes knowledge holistic. For us, knowledge has to be one, knowledge has to be united. We see unity of knowledge. It cannot be packed in silos and kept apart. So the 8 sthai bhavas are which are fundamental aspects which we cannot escape, which are there all the time. Rati, love; hasya, mirth; shok, sorrow; krodh, anger; utsaha, energy; bhaya, terror; jugupsa, disgust; vismaya, astonishment. So these are the sthai bhavas, and then there are sanchari bhavas which come and go. Bhavas give birth to rasas. From every bhava comes out a rasa. From rati comes shrangar, from hasya, shok, karuna, krodha, raudra, utsaha, veera, bhaya, bhayanak, jugupsa, bibhats, vismaya, adbhut, and from shant, shantras. And it is basically the shantras which emanates, which exudes all of the other rasas. So these are the fundamental states, the bhavas that we have. If you cater to all of them, and if you do it properly, you can elevate the reader, the audience to a higher state of consciousness. You can raise them to somewhere nearer Shantarasa. Here is a representation of various rasas. Now, I talked about mudras, so let's discuss just in brief how to express bhavas through mudras. There are various hand gestures in which you actually combine various fingers on your hands and convey various bhavas. For example, there is Jnana Mudra, there is Chin Mudra, there is Bhumi Sparsha Mudra to display various forms of a deity. And these hasta, these mudras are extremely important while you are depicting a sculpture, while you are using a dance form, while you are using and enjoying painting. Mudras are used in dance, sculpture, and even other arts too. So, for example, I talked about the floating shared sacred vocabulary. The mudras that you will see a dancer striking a pose in a temple or anywhere giving a performance, you will see the same mudras in the hands of deities and other sculpted beings on the walls of a temple. So the vocabulary is same. That is how we understand. And that is given to darshana, and darshana is given to stories like Puranas and Itihasas. Those stories percolate down in very small forms like Jatakatha or Panchatantra, which are for a particular purpose, but such small stories, they are then ensconced in great shlokas, great idioms and phrases, kahavatein, lokoktiyan. And in these, they actually percolate to each and every person in the sacred land of Sanatan Dharma. That is how they took Sanatan Dharma to every last man. That is the challenge of anyone who wants to work with Sanatan Dharma. We cannot say that this knowledge is only for this. Of course, that is the way you create and preserve an art form, that is only for a certain few. For example, that's a very clear analogy. When it comes to NASA and when they launch a rocket, not everyone, you and I cannot just barge in to a NASA center and say that we should have the right to launch the rocket, because it needs some technical competence to do that. But when that rocket is launched and when that satellite is in the orbit, everyone can take its benefit. So for creating and preserving that art form, you need to train some experts, but its benefit should be for everyone. And that benefit comes to others in the form of stories, Puranas, Itihasas, small stories, even kahavte, very simple lokukti. This is the beauty of Sanatan Dharma. That is a challenge of anyone who wants to work with IKS, an Indian knowledge system, because that is how it is. We have to speak in a language which everyone understands. We should be able to, that is the beauty of great teachers of Sanatan Dharma. We all are very lucky to listen to Kapil Kapoorji again and again. And the beauty that Kapil Kapoorji brings to it is that there is perhaps no one who fails to understand him. A professor can understand him, a school teacher can, the students can, but even those whom we call as illiterate, even they can understand him if he is speaking in their language, for example, Hindi. That is the beauty of a great carrier of Sanatan Dharma. We don't keep it in jargon, which are privy only to a few. We create vehicles which takes it to each and every last person. The language of Natya Shastra, the language of Mudras and Hasta is exactly that. Then there are ayudhas. So how do you convey a sense? How do you convey a bhava, a form, on perhaps a wall of a temple? So there are, first of all, hasta and mudras, where you show various forms of your hands and fingers, which convey an inner feeling and emotion. Then there are ayudhas, divine attributes of deities, that which they wield. For example, they demark various attributes. There will be pash, there will be khadag, there will be a sword, there will be a trishul, there will be sometimes be a deer, and different kinds of weapons. These weapon is a very limited translation of ayud, because ayud is not limited to thing which hurts. For example, a book in the hand of goddess Saraswati is also an ayud. Ayud is that which they wield. It can be a book and it can be a sword. So it is by recognizing what mudra that they have in their hands. Is it abhaya? Is it varad? Then what weapons and what ayudhas they wield in their hands. For example, this is Chaturvinshati Vishnu, which is a combination of Gada, Shankha, Padma, and Chakra. And by rotating this, they create 24 forms of Vishnu. Very simple case of permutation, but which creates so many beautiful forms of Vishnu. Combination of mudras convey attitudes, different attitudes of the deity. It represents different forms of the deities. For example, here you see the goddess in which two nilotpal, two flowers in her hands. One hand is in abhaya and another is in Varad. So there is a Hast Mudra, then there is an Ayud, in this case just flowers, and then she is sitting in an asan on a Padmasan. There you can see a Padma on which she is sitting. So all of these convey certain bhava, and that is how we recognize our deities. We don't recognize them through their facial features. So it's not like we imagine one deity like this and another like this. It is through what do they wield, how do they sit, stand, or lie down, and what sense are they conveying. In this Vigraha of Vishnu, I guess from Pal era, you can see Shankh, Chakra, Gada, and Varadhast. So Shankh, Chakra, Gada, and Padma, at the place of Padma, they have replaced it with Varadhast. In painting 2, once again you see that. This is once again Mahishasur Mardini. This is actually Durga, not Mahishasur Mardini. She is not killing the demon here. She is just on her mount, which is the lion, and she is holding so many weapons in her hands, and she strikes a certain pose. So all of this conveys a certain Chittabhumi, a certain form of the deity, a certain bhav of the deity. Now, there are various very exact measure through which we paint and sculpt the deities. These measurements and proportions, they use the language of symbols. So, for example, it is only of a certain height that a deity can be built. The greatest of deities have to be built in the high, they have to be built the biggest. They have to be highest and largest. Then the smaller deities have to be built in a smaller form. Other beings have to be built in much smaller forms. It's not like you can create Ravan huge and Shiva as small, unless there is a story which says that, for example, Hanuman going through the body parts of Sursa, demoness Sursa. But apart from that, Ravan has to be displayed as smaller than Sri Ram or Shiva. For example, there is a very famous theme in Hoysala temples where Ravan shaking Kailash, where he was passing through Kailash and he goes and he starts shaking it. And then Shiva, he thinks that he can actually perturb Lord Shiva, but Shiva just puts his foot down, just presses it a little, and Ravan cannot move. So in that, Ravan is shown in a particular proportion. There is this Talaman in various forms in which you have to depict certain deities, which are, it's very technical. Just to give you an idea that there is a whole vocabulary of how to convey the most abstract of concepts to generations across generations. A lot of our temples are 1400 years old, 1300 years old, and still you see them conveying the universal truths. Then there are bhang, for example, to convey the mood. There is some bhang in which a deity is standing straight, in which he is very much a yoga mudra. Then there is tribhang. Tribhang is when they are in a relaxed pose, when they are actually relaxing with the goddess. So when Shiva is shown with Shakti, with Parvati, he is shown with 3 bends of body, in which he is in Alingan, he is relaxing. Similar with other deities too. And then there is Atibhanga. For example, while dancing, Nataraj while dancing, he goes into Atibhangas, which are more than 3, about which I was saying that those poses are not physically possible, but a Hindu would say, why keep the possibility in sculpture and painting? Why keep the language of iconography limited to the limitations of human body? Why not convey the Sukshma reality, the abstract reality, which is above this plane, by using a language which is quote unquote unnatural, but which actually transcends the boundaries of nature and conveys to you an absolute truth, uh, uh, not directly indicates you the absolute truth. And that is why we use such language. Then there is asanas, different kind of asana. Sometimes you see in Padma Yogasana, sometimes you see sit on a Padma, sometimes there is a mount. So there is Yogasana, Padmasana, Swastikasana, various asanas, which also convey certain Chitta Bhumis. Now let us go through very briefly through some of the most basic metaphors of Indian art, and that's how we will proceed. For example, there is the idea of bij, the seed. It is believed that the entire universe comes out, entire Brahman comes from in Kashmir Shaivism, I'll once again take the refrain of Kashmir Shaivism, it comes from the desire of Shakti to create the universe. There is Param Shiva, who is the undivided, indivisible whole, who has no desire to create the universe. Then Param Shiv becomes two, one becomes two, Shiv and Shakti. Shiva still has no desire to create the world. But it is Shakti who has desire to create the world, who wants to play with herself. She's bored. And it's not demeaning to use the word bored. She's bored. She wants to play. And that's why she creates the entire universe and all the elements in it. So that's why it is called as in Shastras as Chid Shakti Vilas, the play of Shiva and Shakti. They are playing. And in this play, in this infinite play, which like Spandan, like Big Bang, it keeps expanding, it keeps contracting, and the play keeps going on. So we have this idea of bija in science, and I'm not trying to validate our shastras through science, but here there are some deep similarities. So just remarking towards the similarities, they have the idea of singularity. So Big Bang, how did universe come about? So they say it came out of nothing. There was this shunya, this zero, this infinite singularity, potentiality from which everything just exploded, came out. In our Shastras, we describe as Bij, what is the cosmic seed? It is variously called as Brahma or the cosmic consciousness. And from this, the entire universe springs from. In architecture, this idea is conveyed in a very beautiful form. For example, here you see, this is a piece of Odishan architecture, Nagara style. You see this Kalash at the top. This Kalash is not just simply an embellishment. Kalash is not simply an embellishment. It is not simply something by which we decorate. It has great meaning because this Kalash has Navagraha inside it. Now, there is a Kalash which everyone can see, which is at the top. But there is another Kalash in every temple, which is underground beneath the Vigraha, beneath the Murti in Garbhagriha, which is underground, which is hidden. It is in the direct line of this Kalash, in the direct line of Vigraha, underground, which also contains Navagraha. The individual seed of the temple and the deity, the Devata, is there in that seed. And this Kalash at the top conducts universal consciousness. When darshan happens, when an archak, when a pujari invokes the deity, what happens in that Vigraha is that the individual consciousness rises from below and the universal consciousness descends from above through that Kalash. In the Vigraha they meet. That is the act of darshan. That's when darshan takes place. So here, that beej is sprouting into a tree. And that universal beej, Shakti, is descending from above. Why? Because she has created the entire universe. She has created you and I. She has created even all the inanimate objects inside the universe. So she can descend wherever she wants to. So if she wants to, she descends from above in the Vigraha she meets. And that's where the act of darshan takes place. So the idea of beej keeps circulating in Indian arts. In language, we have the idea of Bij Mantra, which has given birth not just to mantras, but entire languages. I will not go deep into it. It's a very technical subject, but just the idea. In philosophy, knowledge is indestructible inside the Bij. For example, there are various Puranic stories in which it is said that the Rakshasas have taken over the entire globe everywhere. And this knowledge is hidden in a certain thing. And that if that is saved, and then the entire knowledge is saved. So there are various philosophies in Darshana also, we can see it. Then there is the imagination, the metaphor of tree or stambha, pillar. Mount Meru is a spiritual mountain. It is also considered as a pillar or a mountain. It is a mountain of knowledge. Once you climb Mount Meru, you are supposed to climb the mountain of self-realization or moksha. To tell you here, Hindu temple and the shikhar of Hindu temple is also considered Mount Meru. So when you go to a temple and you're supposed to be climbing that path of self-knowledge, that mountain of self-knowledge itself. We have pillars everywhere, in stupas, in Sanchi. pillars in all the temples. These pillars are from the absolutely exquisite Mahamandapam of one of the most favorite temples that I have ever visited, Veera Narayan Hoysar Temple in Belawadi, Karnataka, Chikmagaluru district. And it has one of the largest open mandapams in all of Hoysar temples, and it's beautiful. So the pillars are everywhere. Sacred mountains like Kailash are also considered as pillars. And if you remember that story about Shiv Puran, which has been popularized a lot, that in the beginning there was this brilliant shaft of light, which was limitless, endless. And Brahma and Vishnu, they find themselves admiring that shaft of light. So they say, what is this shaft of light? Let's find out. You go upwards, I will go downwards, and we will see where it ends. Now, Vishnu goes upwards, I guess, and he does not find any end because Shiva is limitless, he is endless, he is Ajanma. So there is no end to Shiva. There is no beginning and no end to Shiva. That's why he's Mahakal. He ends death itself. He is the death of death itself. So there is no end to Shiva. Now, Vishnu recognizes that he has not found it and he accepts it. When Brahma goes, he says he lies because he is ashamed that he did not find the truth. So he comes back and he says that, yes, I found the end, which is not so. So that is why, that is a story which says that that's why Vishnu is worshipable, and we worship Vishnu and of course Shiva, and we do not worship, we of course worship Brahma a lot and respect him a lot, but there are not many specific temples dedicated to him. In later era, some temples are built, like that famous Brahma temple in Pushkar. There is one in Khed Brahma, Gujarat. There is one in Goa also. We are going to take the participants of Brahat in the next Brahat Anveshi to that Brahma Karmali temple. So there are 3 or 4, but that is the story behind it. So Shiva and knowledge itself is seen as pillar, stambha. Sacred Arunachala is the place where it is said that that sacred shaft with the story that I just told you about was seen, Agni Ling. That's why Panch Mahabhut Kshetram, Arunachala is considered to be the most sacred of all. It's called to be the Agni Kshetra. In this temple, Viman is considered as a pillar once again. And here also you can see the temple Shikhar as a stambha or a tree. That is how it is imagined. Now, there is this idea of Purush, macro, micro man. Now, this is not connected to gender. The modern discourse actually pollutes it because they see it only through the new lenses that they have created. They're not interested in knowledge itself. They want to take something out of the author who wrote, for whom, by whom, because they cannot see knowledge as independent. So they cannot imagine that there could have been a civilization which institutionalized the independence of knowledge, where it didn't matter who was writing, his personality was never actually inserted into the art form. So here we have the idea of Purusha. Purush is the Siddhant, the principle, and Prakriti is its manifestation. There is Purush cannot express itself without the manifestation of Prakriti, and without the Siddhant also there can be no manifestation. So it's not one dependent on the other, they are both dependent on each other, and without one, the other doesn't mean anything. Without one, the other will not even be possible. For example, there is Purush of Sankhya Yoga, which is the ultimate principle. The Mool is Siddhanta, from which everything comes down, the supreme principle. Then there is Vastu Purush. I cannot go deep right now, but in architecture, the basic plan, this is the most of the temples are built on a square piece of land. Even if the Garbhagriha might be circular or rectangular or Gaj Prashtakar, apsidal, but the greater piece of land will almost always be square. And this is how it is imagined, that there is a Vastu Purush which is lying here. And on different parts of this Vastu Purush, different deities sit on his Nabhi, because Nabhi is the center. Nabhi is the point of origin, which is also true about human beings and lots of mammals, that from Nabhi, from the umbilical cord, everything emerges. That is actually a direct link back to origins. So that's why Nabi is the place where everything emerges. That's why from the Nabi of Vishnu, Brahma emerges. So that is the Brahmasthan. This is where Garbhagriha is built. This is where the Vigraha is kept. Similarly, there is the idea of this, because it's Siddhant, it's principle, universal principles. So we have the idea of Natya Purush, Sangeet Purush, Shilpa Purush, and we have this is how we imagine all of the disciplines. This is the idea of Pind and Brahmand. We have heard that famous saying, Pind mein Brahmand, which is to reflect the entire universe in one atom. There is this metaphor of Indra's net, in which there are infinite atoms, infinite nodes, and every node reflects every other node. That is how we have taken. We take one simple manifestation, and through it, we explain the supreme principle. No matter where you start from, you will end up there. Dr. Rajneesh Mishra, the disciple of Kapil Kapoorji, he says beautifully, he says that all Indian disciplines start from Bhed and end towards Abhed, where there is no distinction. They start from distinction, that I am I, you are you, and they end up at a place of no distinction. That is why we have this concept of Pind and Brahman. We have this technique. Then there is the concept of Nabhi, where the universe emerges, converges, and emerges from. So this is the cosmic cycle. From Bij emerges a tree. Tree is also seen as a pillar. Pillar is also seen as a mountain. Mountain is taken to be a Purush. Now that Purush has a Nabhi, and from Nabhi comes out the Bij, and the cosmic cycle goes on. That is the beautiful symbology. In Ayurveda, we have Nabhi is the source of Dhamanis. I will not go deep. There are great Ayurveda acharyas who can expand on it, but the concept exists in Ayurveda too. Yagyavedi is also considered as Nabhi, where the Devta emerges. When you chant the mantras, when you do that japa, when you're doing yagya, you actually imagine the deity in very minute forms. And that's how in the Prajalit Agni of Yagyavedi, the deity is invoked and deity comes. Temple is imagined as a permanent form of Yagyavedi. That is its direct correlation with Vedic times. So they say there were no temples in Vedas. Of course not, because that was a different age. But the very philosophy and darshan of Hindu temple is completely connected to a Vedic philosophy. Here, one imagination of Padmanabh Swami as the Vigraha is in Padmanabh Swami temple in Thiruvananthapuram. This is the Nabhi of Vastu Purush also. In architecture also there is Nabhi. Nabhi is there in iconography also. All the proportions are hinged on Nabhi. That is the sacred center, iconometry. In music also, highest priority is given to Nabhi in voice production. Those who are musicians or those who are singers, they know. In music also, it's extremely important. It is critical in dance too. All the mudras that are taken, all the bhangas that are taken, they hinge on the Nabhi. Then we have the idea of Garbh as the cosmic womb. I'm going to wind up soon. So this is Gufa or cave. Why is it called Garbhagriha? Because it is literally imagined as the Garbh of a mother, womb of a mother. This is Ajanta cave, if I'm not mistaken. I was there more than 10 years ago. Cave number 26 in Ajanta. So it's a beautiful cave. It's a Gufa. And the metaphor of Garbhagriha is taken from that. Just like a Garbh is dark, it's moist. It's where the creation takes place. So our temples have, that's why our Garbhagriahas are not full of light. They say, why are they so dark and moist? It is because it is supposed to emulate the Garbh. And that's where you're also supposed, the sansar is supposed to fall off as you come from outside to inside. You're supposed to stand in front of Garbhagriha when you pray, when you do japa. The sansar is supposed to fall off. You should only see the devta. That's how the Garbhagriha is. This is the Garbhagriha of Chaturbhuj Temple, Khajuraho. In this shot, you can actually see the Vigraha. from here. Garbhagriha is built at the Nabhi. In this map, you can see. Now we have the imagination of chakra. Chakra is it signifies cosmic order. So there is Dharma Chakra, symboling Rit. Rit is cosmic rhythm, the universal rules which play out in the cosmos. So it symbolizes cosmic rhythm which has to go on, and it goes in circles and circular time. Chakra is directly represented in architecture, not just at Konark, at various temples. Konark, not just a Konark wheel, but various other temples too. In Borobudur, this is the great Buddha temple at Borobudur, where square and circle are both represented. The main plan is a square, and they turn it into a circle. That's also a beautiful philosophy. We might discuss it someday else. Sanchi, also the stoop, you can see the circle. In Shriyante also you can see the play of a square and circle. A square represents human civilization, circle represents the divine. And when we actually turn a circle into a square into a circle, you are making the turn from human to divine. You're turning human into divine. How do you turn? And architecture, they did that actually beautifully. They showed us how to do it, indicated towards it. If you rotate a square a little, and if you keep rotating it many times, you will see that it is acquiring many sides. If you rotate it in infinite times, it becomes the circle, which is significant of the divine. In temples, they've done it. I do not have that much time, but in temple architecture, they've actually shown it. They've also shown it on the walls of temples. How did they do it? It's a beautiful, beautiful study. Then the same chakra, the turners of those rhythms are there in human body. Sahasra, Rakya, Vishuddhi, Anahat, Manipur, Swadhisthana, and Mooladhara. That is where I would like to end. Indian art is all about symbols. But all of these symbols are, first of all, they make our lives beautiful. Life is nothing without beauty. Whatever way in which you live life, it has to be lived with beauty. So it has to be beautiful. Life is never without meaning. There is always meaning in it. And we have to find it. We have to go on that path where there is meaning. So it has to be meaningful. Once again, to repeat the three principles, and it has to be elevating in consciousness. It has to leave us at a better place than we were before we embarked on the journey. That is, in a very small nutshell, what is Indian art. I apologize for this time is not enough to convey more, or I am not good enough to convey it more forcefully, but this is how best I could do. This is Indian art in a nutshell, as Sri Aurobindo indicated, as our greats like Ananda Kumar Swami and Kapila Vatsayana indicated, in contemporary times also. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Pankaj ji. आपका ये अध्ययन जितना डीप है और इतना वास्ट है कि सचमुच में इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल कि ये टाइम आपके लिए सचमुच में बहुत कम. It's a beautifully narrated and so many perspective you brought in this, while discussing. मतलब अद्भुत लगा. मैं आपको सच बताऊं तो मतलब एक aspect आप लेकर आ गए, और the way you describe and it rather it opens up not only mind but it touches the heart also, because हम लोग ऐसे नहीं देखते हैं. जब कोई भी कला को देखते हैं तो बड़ी अलग नजरिए से देखते हैं, और फिर हमें जो पढ़ाया गया वो भी नजरिया कुछ अलग था. so वो जब जाते हैं तो कुछ बहुत उसमें मतलब गर्भगृह का जो आपने बताया या नाभि का आपने जो बताया, दैट इज टोटली न्यू फॉर मी. गर्भगृह का तो अंदाज था, लेकिन नाभि का जो आपने बताया वो सचमुच में नई बात है. इट इज सो ब्यूटीफुल.
थैंक यू.
एक सवाल है मुझे, जो कि आपका पूरा का पूरा ये और वो सचमुच में टच किया, जैसे हार्मोनाइजिंग इनर एंड आउटर रियल्म्स. it opens up. You were talking about the surrounding and it opened up certainly. जैसे सिर्फ मुझे एक क्वेश्चन था कि ये जो हम यूजुअली कला के बारे में बात करते हैं तो हम मंदिर, आर्किटेक्चर, हमारी इवन व्हाट यू से डांस फॉर्म, ये सब ले आते हैं।
जी
मुझे ऐसा लगता है कहीं ना कहीं हम लोग मिस कर जाते हैं नेचुरल एलिमेंट को, प्रकृति को। वो कला, वो किसी फॉर्म में अगर डिस्क्राइब रहे तो बात आ जाती है। जब आप इसको आर्ट को मीनिंगफुल बता रहे थे, दैट टाइम आई वाज जस्ट थिंकिंग दैट बिकॉज आई रेड ऑलवेज पोएट्री, और वहाँ प्रकृति की बात आती है,
जी
तो वो उसमें हम मीनिंग ढूंढने जाते हैं तो वो थोड़ा सा लिमिटेड रह जाता है। दैट इज व्हाट उसको बंद कर देता है। और
जी
यूं ही प्रकृति की बात करते तो इट इज सो वास्ट एंड इट इट
जी
इट ओपन्स अप अ लॉट।
जी
तो मुझे ये समझ में नहीं आया कि हाउ वी कैन कनेक्ट प्रकृति इन दिस, इफ यू
जी
कैन, आई डोंट नो।
जी
इट इज
प्रकृति का भी डायरेक्ट रिप्रेजेंटेशन है. इफ यू गो टू temples, some ancient temples, there is direct representation of prakriti. And we had different means of studying prakriti also, nature. For example, there were sciences which were developed to study various forms of nature. In art, the primary purpose was to not be limited, because there are certain because nature exists in material form. So it has to have certain limitations. The purpose of art was to elevate you above those limitations by respecting the boundaries of nature, by reflecting it, and by reflecting and respecting nature, also transcending it spiritually. Abhi kya hai, the western civilization is all about destroying nature. They want to transcend, not transcend nature. They want to upend nature by controlling it completely. But what our view was to respect it, its physical boundaries, but spiritually transcending it. So our Indian art is always about how do you turn it inwards, how do you turn this physical, like vastu architecture, into an inner journey, sculpture into an inner journey. Nature is outside, you start from nature. So where is nature in it? Because even though there are 16 hands, it's not modern art. It's not like there is half a face or there is one eye without any meaning. It's not meaningless. It's not formless. So they imitate the forms of nature. That's where they start. So they respect nature by imitating it, but then they don't limit themselves to it. They elevate it to a different level. So that's how we use nature in a way, symbolically, by respecting its forms, most beautiful forms. So, for example, the animals that are described, they are extremely realistic. The human forms that are described, they are based on their models in reality, but they transcend them. So we do not limit ourselves to it, but that is the central message of Sri Aurobindo also. He looks at Greek art and he says that because it's extremely realistic. So when I was a kid, I was actually very fascinated to look at this Greek art. Even the abs are displayed, and when they are wearing something, even the tresses of that gown, it can easily be seen. And that is, of course, great art. There is no doubt about it. It's extremely beautiful. But Kumar Swami says, Sri Aurobindo would maintain, Sri Aurobindo said that that is actually a lower form. You have to rise above it. You have to transcend it. That is the purpose of Indian.
And I think last question, I don't know, okay, though we don't have much time, but this is a kind of concern. Normally, and it started from the student. He said कि मैम आप जब भी बात करते हैं तो प्राचीन सभ्यता, प्राचीन संस्कृति, और इवन आप टेम्पल की बात करते हैं तो हम वहीं ले जाते हैं। तो क्या बीच में जो डिस्ट्रॉय हुआ या हमारा कॉलोनियल वो माइंडसेट हुआ, लेकिन क्या आधुनिक समय में कोई भी ऐसी चीज नहीं है जो हमें आध्यात्म से, किसी ने भी काम नहीं किया जो आध्यात्म से रिलेट करे पर्टिकुलरली
नहीं
ना?
नहीं, बल्कि मैं तो कहूंगा ऐसा इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन कंटिन्यूअस इसलिए है क्योंकि वो कंटिन्यूटी कभी टूटी ही नहीं. वह गुरु, वह ज्ञान, वह कला की आज भी जो शास्त्रीय नर्तक हैं, जो शास्त्रीय गायक हैं, वह अनब्रोकन कंटिन्यूटी में प्राचीन काल से गुरु से शिष्य करके चले आ रहे हैं. जो हमारे वेदांग हैं उनका अध्ययन करने वाले अनब्रोकन कंटिन्यूटी में चले आ रहे हैं. जो इवन हमारे साइंसेस हैं वो अनब्रोकन कंटिन्यूटी में चले आ रहे हैं, आज भी रेलेवेंट हैं. और अगर आप अपने धर्म के जो प्रिंसिपल्स हैं, अगर आप 30 साल पहले भी अपना जो समाज देखें, अभी एक बहुत बड़ा चेंज आ रहा है मॉडर्न इकोनॉमी से, जिसमें हम प्रकृति से दूर जाके फ्लैट जैसे, ऐसे मैं भी अभी कोई ऑप्शन ही नहीं है, एक फ्लैट में रहता हूँ, तो इसमें ना कोई नाभि है ना कोई गर्भ का स्थान है. क्योंकि सिविल आर्किटेक्चर में एक डिफरेंस होता था, मंदिर में गर्भ स्थान पर, नाभि के स्थान पर देवता की मूर्ति होती थी. जब घर बनाते थे तो आप उसको खाली छोड़ देते थे टू द एलिमेंट्स, वहां पर तुलसी अथवा कोई मंदिर बना दिया जाता था, आप उसमें रहते नहीं थे। तो ब्रह्म स्थान वहां भी होता था। एवरीथिंग फॉर अस इज रिवॉल्व्स अराउंड द सेक्रेड, रिवॉल्व्स अराउंड व्हाट्स धार्मिक। बट वो पूरा ऐसा, तो हमारा जो जिस घर में मेरा जन्म हुआ वह ऐसा घर था, बीच में एक तुलसी थी। मैं आपको केवल एक एनेक्डोट बताऊंगा जिससे कि कितना रेलेवेंट था धर्म। सुबह मेरी दादी उठती थी, और आप कॉन्टिन्यूटी देखिए कि उनके समय में गैस आ चुकी थी, पर गैस से पहले जब चूल्हा जलता था तो चूल्हे में एम्बर्स प्रिजर्व किए जाते थे। दे वुड प्रिजर्व द एम्बर्स कोल्स ओवरनाइट, and even though there was gas in our house, my grandmother would used to preserve those had to be preserved every night, and the longer the coal was preserved, the greater the continuity was. So one day, I remember, I will never forget that one day she picked up those coals, वो पिंसठ से, and she said, "Do you know these coals? They are 80 years old. They were given by my grandmother to my mother, who gave it to me, and now I am carrying it." Imagine that sense of continuity where fire keeps burning continuously for 80 years in a single home in that rasoi. And now, just turn your attention towards the word rasoi. In our, now we all call it kitchen. At that time, that word rasoi was, we didn't shy away from it. Rasoi is literally that where ras emerges. So the same vocabulary which is in food, which is also there in Natya Shastra and Rasa. Shanta Ras is where, from which every ras comes. So the same terminology which is given in Puja Ghar, in Mandir, it is also given in Rasoi. Rasoi was considered the second most sacred place in home after the Mandir. And my grandmother would not allow anyone to enter outside the appointed hours. Men were almost, you will get food, but you cannot touch anything. You cannot enter it because they will not. And how her routine would be, she would wake up in the morning, first do her ablutions. She would not even enter kitchen or even speak without bathing. After doing her daily nityakarn and the ablutions and all the jap and puja, she would enter the kitchen. Then she would cook. The first kaur she would offer to the fire itself, going to the gods. Once that was cooked, she would then take it to mandir and offer to the deities. Then after that, she would go to the garden, put something in tulsi. After that, we will eat the pancharin, the devtas, the prakriti, and then we will eat. After we had eaten, before that, she would give one roti to cow. Yes. And after we had eaten, she would give the last roti to the dog. After that was done, the small atta that remained in the katordan, she would gather it, leave it for the ants. Imagine that universe in which dharma was so prevalent in the lifestyle. Now, she never passed fifth standard. She didn't study beyond that. But she was the most educated person in our entire family still. I cannot measure up to her. It's not just her grace. It's not my respect for her. None after her, my father's generation, our generation, can measure up in dharmic knowledge to what she carried without going to all, and perhaps because not going to modern university and all, she carried all that dharma. So dharma was so living. Dharma is something to live. It is not it's not belief. That's why we are different from prophetic monotheistic systems. We do not have to believe in those things. We have to live dharma. You have to live and practice. And dharma is that which sustains. Anything which balances. It is the eternal balance, eternal thermostat, which always keeps balancing things. That is, that dharma is to live. So how can that disappear from our lives? How can that not be relevant today? Sanatan dharma is that which is eternal. It's neither old nor new.
Yeah.
It is that which always is. वो ना पुराना है ना नया है, वह शाश्वत है, उसमें नया पुराना कुछ नहीं.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Pankaj ji. Thank you. Beluji.
Yeah, no, I want to just, I mean, it was beautiful, and I just want to bring the conversation back to art a little bit. Art in the light of our dharmic traditions. आप बात कर रहे थे जब ताजमहल की. I was reminded of a little anecdote. I think I've shared it probably in one of our sessions earlier about how Nandalal Bose, when he first went and he saw Taj Mahal, he thought, I mean, it's beautiful, magnificent piece of architecture, and yet something was missing for him until he went back to Taj Mahal on a full moon night. So it was the full moon, the light of the full moon, which brought a whole new dimension of beauty to this marvelous piece of architecture. So that this story is told by one of his students in his biography as to how to bring out the idea of how in Indian architecture, even up to Indo-Islamic architecture, this Indo-Sarkanic architecture, how this idea of the placement of a monument was so important, so that what kind of natural light. So this is another way, I guess, the way I understand, Kiranji, to bring in nature and what nature has to provide to bring out beauty of that piece of art that is being created. So, there are temples where sunlight touches the feet of deity in a certain way. So there are so many other calculations that are done. So that's just one thought that I had. I also just, I connected it that with as to the experience of art. It's not just about what is being witnessed, but the witnesser. So the witnesser, when he sees this Nandalal Bose, when he saw Taj Mahal in the presence of the night full moon, the witnesser in him witnessed a whole other dimension of beauty, which probably was missing earlier. So that part I really liked. I just wanted to also ask you one thing. I mean, the examples you gave were very interesting, but it was also probably very deliberate on your part to bring in, to highlight the three purposes, as you said, the art that is beautiful, meaningful, and elevating, which again closely match with what Sri Aurobindo said, the aesthetic, the educative, and the spiritual purpose of art. But there are many examples. I just want to kind of put it out there. There are beautiful works of art, even in the Western artistic tradition, which do all of these. So you were trying to just bring out the mundaneness of installation.
I have written an entire series on it. So the Taj Mahal is, of course, extremely exquisite and beautiful.
Yes.
But it doesn't go beyond a certain point. Yes. Our architecture will cross all those boundaries, and they will reach a certain, of course, Islamic architecture, and I find personally Persian architecture even more beautiful. If you go to Deccan and all of their work with blue tiles and different tiles, and the way they use symmetry is even more beautiful than Mughal architecture. Then if you go to Gothic churches, so something which comes closest to Hindu temple in the whole world, apart from, of course, the Chinese architecture, which is done mostly in wood. So a lot of that has not survived. It is monumental. Of course, there are great Buddhas. But apart from that, Communist Party destroyed so much. Actually, one Chinese tourist told me that in one district alone, every single district, they destroyed 50,000 temples in 1960. In one district, destroying 50,000 temples. So they survived the Islamic ages, the colonial age, but then they didn't survive communism. So apart, if you take Japan and China away, what comes closest to us is the Gothic architecture, which has its inspiration very much in the pagan Greek and Roman architecture. So there you see fractal design, where temple within temple within temple, which is there very much present in Hindu architecture, which is there in Gothic architecture. It's very symbolic. And symbolic art in all traditional societies is always kept higher than realistic art. What happens in Renaissance, so how Kumar Swami saw it, how Sri Aurobindo saw it, Renaissance is actually a degradation of Western art. That's where the degradation starts. It becomes complete during somewhere scientific revolution and industrial revolution, and after Impressionism in painting, after Impressionism and Expressionism, it actually goes down, because in Renaissance they started paying more attention towards form and structure and only nature. So, for example, this is a great conundrum in Renaissance. How to bring more light to where people are gathering. So they are discussing how to create a dome which is very big, in which the oculus is so big, so that light starts streaming in. Now that's a very commendable, objective. But in that, they lost function of the symbolic language of architecture. In Gothic architecture, there are flying. One form of architecture is one technical term is flying buttresses. So, for example, the high walls and the ceiling cannot be supported by unless they are punctuated with great pillars, and those pillars are supported with sloping ramps. Now they had to create it because for the structural integrity of the place, otherwise that would come down. But because they had to do it, so they decorated every single piece of that ramp and converted into a language which actually elevated you. So they had to use something, but they used it so that it is used symbolically. Instead, in Renaissance, what happens is more and more focus is on how to bring more light, how to fit more people, how to do this, which is of course admirable, but from the traditional point of view, it degrades, and the fractal geometry of Gothic architecture is suddenly lost in Renaissance architecture, only brought again in one of the greatest quirky creations, but which was a standalone in Antonio Gaudi's that Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, which is still under construction after 160 years. It is supposed to be, I think, complete in next 1 decade or so, where one artist, he caught that form, and it is one of the most magnificent creation in modern times. So if you have if anyone has not seen, just search Sagrada Familia, in which all of those features come in. So in Western art, Gothic architecture is which comes actually closest to us. But because there is no absolute truth, there is no bij. When they go to that bij is the Bible, which is an ideology which doesn't tell you the way for self-realization. So that is why the bij is not there. So the language is that it's very elevating, uplifting, but they leave you somewhere on the upper realms. And after Renaissance, it's about building. It's about, how it looks, how many people can fit in, how light can come streaming in. So all of that, those discussions start. Nowadays, it is mostly the ego constructions of a particular architect. Most of that, like Zaha Hadid, one of the greatest architects of modern times, Iraqi who migrated to America. Every single building is made to look. I've done an entire series in the Artists in the Art series in architecture. Every single building looks like a particular form. There is an egg. There is, an undulating tinfoil. So it's very voyeuristic in the sense that she imagines a building, how it would look from very far away. But when you are inside it, the meaning and the symbolism is compromised. There is no symbolism. Even the actually form and meaning is compromised. Usefulness is compromised. For example, most of the skyscrapers today, they say they cannot use up to 35 to 40% of the space because they have to twist it this way. They have to, show a certain form, build it a certain way. Otherwise, how will you differentiate yourself from others? Every building will look the same in that way. So that has happened in the West. That is happening now in India too. But the most important part of Indian architecture is this. In my view, something of Western. So Chinese architecture and Japanese, of course, is closer to us in meaning. It might not be as monumental. It might not be as durable. So I'm not being chauvinistic. I'm just being very realistic when I say that pink sandstone marvels in Hindu temple architecture that we created are the greatest creations in architecture ever. उससे बड़ा कुछ काम नहीं हुआ है. So the only thing comparable in China and Japan, they could not do monumentality that much, and even it's not as minute. But in Western tradition, in non-Indic tradition, non-dharmic tradition, let's say, prophetic monotheistic tradition, only the Gothic cathedral comes very close to us.
Just a couple of quick things, and then I know we are anyway way behind.
Yeah.
I liked your thing about square and circle thing, and I was remembering how Sri Aurobindo at one place says, for him, square represents, or a square is symbolic of perfect manifestation, which he calls as supermind. And it's, in Sri Aurobindo's symbol also that square represents that perfect manifestation. And you were talking about how from human to divine, as you keep turning the square, because that is where the perfect manifestation, where human and divine become one. Yeah. That is, so I was just thought very intriguing from the oldest dharmic darshan to, his language of supermind.
There is an entire lecture that I've created on that. Actually, in the last FDP that happened in Nagpur, I delivered that. Maybe some other day we'll have a square and circle of Indian arts.
Yes.
Kapila Vatsyayan, great Kapila Vatsyayan has written an entire book.
Yes, exactly.
She has taken that
Right,
Wonderful
right.
work, wonderful.
Exactly. And just one other thing, well, one quick thing about, you were talking about Brahma Temple. There is one Brahma Temple in Las Vegas also,
Yeah,
outside
Now
one of
they
the
will.
casinos. Yeah.
Now they will be building even in
Yeah, yeah,
India. So I have been to 3. One in Goa, one in
yeah.
Khed-Brahm in Gujarat, and one in Pushkar in Rajasthan, which everyone knows.
Okay.
But I'm told that there are 2 more. One in somewhere in Andhra, one somewhere else. So there are 5 in India now. Now they are
Okay.
building, but the
Yeah.
general thing is that we would not build great temples.
Yes.
Even there inside the temple always.
Right, right.
Not the primary deity. not
Yes.
the primary.
No, and I have been to the one in Goa. I don't know about the others,
Brahmakaram.
but
Yeah.
yeah. But
Wonderful.
Kiranji, I think this is another thing where you talked about nature. I was thinking about mother's emphasis on working with flowers to develop aesthetic appreciation. More like instead of, I guess the better word is aesthetic sensitivity to beauty. I think that's another very novel way of bringing in that, very delicate sensibility towards how should we approach nature. And flowers, she said, is the soul aspect, the psychic element in the plant kingdom, in the vegetable kingdom. So in that sense, I think there have been attempts to to use the best in nature, the soul presence in nature, to develop, for artistic aesthetic sensibility. So I think maybe we can have a session on language of flowers at some point. So that I thought would be very interesting. So no, I think it was delightful, Pankajji, to hear from you. And you, like Kiranji was saying, you brought in so much. I mean, I had just notes and comparison that were going on in my mind with something that mother had written, a play, which is exactly, like symbolic of what Mount Meru is, the way you were describing. So thank you so much for giving us this very delightful experience. So
Thank you. Thank you.
we have to bring you back for more.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. It will be my privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.